going to speak about the case of Matthew Margolies. Matthew vanished and was found dead the next day from his Pemberwick, Greenwich, Connecticut home. Well, from his neighborhood. The day was August 31st, 1984. It was a Friday. He was going fishing. He had recently lost his grandfather, his fishing buddy. And his way of grieving was to do what they loved to do together. So that's what he went to do with the fishing pole his grandfather had given him. The fishing pole has never been recovered, and neither has his tackle. He was killed with a 10-inch boning knife, which makes you think crime of opportunity. He was stripped, but he did have his underwear on, and they found no signs of sexual abuse. But the thing that makes me think it wasn't a crime of opportunity necessarily was the fact that he was also asphyxiated. In a way I've never heard before, traumatic asphyxiation. It's almost like positional, where they put, really heavy over your chest or your tummy, and you can't breathe. So the combination of the two killed him. It's interesting that they never said whether it was his boning knife or not from his tackle box. Maybe they didn't know. He was last seen getting into a car, supposedly, with a group of boys. They were a makeshift gang. They called themselves the Valley Boys, because that area was the valley. Matter of fact, his body was found actually on September 5th, about a week later. Just a correction. Interestingly, a gentleman that I actually am friends with on Facebook, the FBI's John Douglas, actually did the psychological profile on this case. He figured the killer was a white male that was familiar with Matthew and his fishing routines, perhaps unkempt and overweight, with a drinking or a drug problem. Now, he's the best at what he does, so he's probably pretty darn close to right. And while I'm talking about John Douglas, I want to thank him for personally writing to me and telling me how proud he was of what I do and how good he thought it was. That's awesome. Can't get better praise than that. The killer knew the area because he was taken up on a hilltop, hid underbrush. As a matter of fact, that very summer, another boy, also 13, was lured to a vacant apartment where he was just absolutely brutalized. And he said if he'd have come forward, maybe Matt would still be alive. Not necessarily, because you don't know if the police would have caught them, or even taken you seriously. Matter of fact, he was lured there with the promise of soda. The other boy, his first name is Jeff. I will say that because it is in reports, but that's as far as I'm going because he was a victim of some pretty severe abuse. By a man named Perry, who I believe is one of the suspects in this case as well. Like I said, he pretty badly beat him, and to this day, Jeff believes that the same young man who brutalized him killed Matthew. Unfortunately, the police department made some of the same mistakes in this case that they made in the Martha Moxley case because of inexperience. They really didn't have experience with murder. I mean, it's Greenwich, Connecticut. Which, while it is technically a city, it's a small town. It's, for the most part, extremely rich. And people stay behind their mansion walls and MYOB for the most part, unless they're, partying it up at fancy parties together. And they won't be seen with those from Pemberwick, so. There really isn't a lot of experience to be gained there. Two factors persuaded them that Matthew's case was going to be difficult to solve. Which proved correct. Matthew's case had no trace evidence except for a piece of hair, and they had collected evidence from 10 persons of interest. I don't know whether that DNA was ever tested, or if that hair still exists. So that's one of, like I said, that's stated as one of the issues in this case, because they might find something, But again, their crime lab didn't have a lot of experience. I think it did finally go to the states. By 2002, DNA eliminated a bunch of the suspects, so I guess they did finally do some DNA testing, which is good. One of the suspects, Roger Bates, was in jail in Dallas for molesting a boy. In fact, a cop testified at his trial that he had been molested as a boy by Bates. So, the problem is, well, first of all, there was no DNA match with Bates, but second, Matthew wasn't sexually abused, or at least that's what the coroner said. So, Dr. Henry Lee, as everyone knows, is one of the preeminent trace evidence people. Dr. Henry Lee joined the case in the 2000s to try and help identify a killer through this trace evidence. He was part of the Greenwich Continuing Education Program for police officers, crime buffs, people like that, to prepare them for things like this. Sadly, his mother and the man who later became his stepfather actually smelled the foul odor when they were searching for him. This came out much later, but they didn't dare investigate it, and I'm so glad they didn't. Again, he died of multiple stab wounds and that brutal asphyxiation. As a matter of fact, it was after the police chief hired a consultant from the NYPD, former NYPD, to examine what they were doing wrong. And he found some of the same mistakes, as I mentioned earlier, from the Martha Moxley case, in this case. A lot of it, I believe, due to inexperience. And in fact, nobody had seen his report until one of the newspapers, the Greenwich Times, actually requested it via FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. Unfortunately, it was redacted to hell, which you can expect on any kind of document like that. Matthew never got to see his mother's wedding. He never got to see his sister marry and have his nieces and nephews. He never got to marry and have his own family. Someone needs to be brought to justice for that. Someone needs to be held to account for brutally ending the life of a 13-year-old grieving child. He never even got the chance to finish grieving. And his poor mother, Marianne, still grieving the loss of her father a few months earlier, now has to bury her child. I cannot even imagine what she went through. I have an update on Tuesday's case. The boarding school, there were at least two, it turns out was connected to a cult called Synanon. 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 And they were a pretty weird cult and abusive. In fact, going through the missing persons records, you will find that there is a woman missing from a Synanon drug rehabilitation center. It was sort of a front for their cult, these centers. At some point, I guess this one wasn't part of it anymore. I'm not 100% sure, but I know these were fronts. Both the drug rehab, the children's, the youth boarding schools and stuff were fronts for this particular cult. In the links from Tuesday's video, you will find a whole thing about a documentary done. So I highly urge you to check out the link in Tuesday's video. Again, I reached out to the guy to try to get him on my radio show. I will update you if he reaches back to me. Let you know where we're going from here. That being said, have a great day. It's finally a beautiful sunny day, although very cold. Remember, ask FMA. Goodbye and God bless.